Tiny heads up before we start this video, I am not a mental health professional, nor am I a doctor. I'm just somebody who deals with a lot of things in life, just like anybody else, has my own mental health issues, has my own physical health issues, and I wanted to talk today about grief for a few minutes. So just keep those things in mind. Don't take it as medical advice or whatever. If you need help, there are things like suicide hotlines. There are things obviously like resources, which I'll link some in the description down below actually, so that they're easier to find just in case. But I just want to talk about this from my perspective for a few minutes, and something I've been kind of noticing and feeling lately, and a disturbing trend I've noticed in the world, this idea of just get over it. This idea of just move on, grow up. Everything, everybody has bad things happen. You gotta move on. You gotta get over it. And while there is some nugget of truth to this, like there is some amount of picking yourself back up, learning to live, things like that, I think there's this very unhealthy divorce between the idea of feeling and the idea of time, especially in the West. And I wanted to talk about it a little bit because that's kind of my perspective on it. Now, whenever I stray outside of my niche, if you even think this channel has one at this point, because it's variety and already flounders from that, YouTube wants to take this channel to the gallows and publicly execute it in the algorithm. So if you enjoy videos like this, the real talk, stuff like that, let me know. Doing things like leaving the like or telling me you like it. Those actually let me know that you, a real person, enjoy this content and want to see more of it. So I appreciate that. If you're not seeing the videos, I have been posting on this channel quite a bit, but they just haven't really gone out. Now, that said, when it comes down to it, I recently lost a family member. Actually, just a few weeks ago, a family member passed away. And I think the first thing people think when they hear that is like, I'm really sorry for your loss. I hope you're okay. I hope everything's okay. Now, while this did make me sad, something that I noticed about it was that this was a family member who I was not super close to. Now, did it affect me because it was someone I knew growing up, somebody who it was my aunt, so someone who, I knew my cousins, obviously, and, some of my cousins were some of my best friends growing up. Yeah, obviously, it's something that affected me in that way. But it's not something that affected me nearly as much as her children, right? Or as people closer to her in her life. Something I noticed that made me feel guilty at first when this happened was actually that I was thinking more and more about my dad. My dad, who passed away a few years ago. And you're going to think, well, this guy is playing zombies in the background. Is this a little tasteless? We're talking about the dead, we're playing zombies. The reason I wanted to do this is, one, other than being part of the ADHD generation myself, where people need something to stimulate their eyes, I also think it's kind of an interesting allegory because, like zombies, grief is something that actually does just keep coming back. No matter how much you shoot it, no matter how much you put it down, no matter what you're told to do about it, it does just keep coming back. There is almost this idea, and I think it's a little bit sociopathic actually, that you have a timeline on your grief. And it wasn't something I thought about until recently when my mom was telling me about one of her friends, or not even her friends, just someone she knew, all right, through work, and how this person essentially had lost her husband. And her husband passed away from an illness. It was unexpected. And then 6 months later, she heard another coworker saying to this person, hey, don't you think it's time you start dating again? Don't you think it's time you move on? And this to me, one, sounds made up, but it really did happen. My mom does not make up anything. My mom, if you ask my mom to lie for you, borderline she'll start crying, okay? This is like a very devout Christian woman, tries to do right by everybody. Like, we're talking... what's the opposite of a Karen? Like the nicest lady you'll ever meet. Very sincere. She doesn't lie about stuff, at least intentionally. So I know that this happened. And I thought about it, and I thought about how bizarre of a statement this was of, isn't it time for you to move on? Don't you want to try dating someone else now? Don't you want to try this, that, or this? This person had their timeline in their head about how long it should take for someone, just generically anyone around them, to get over a death like that. And honestly, the death of your partner, someone who, in the right circumstances, I know divorce is a thing, obviously, but I would say that when you marry, you probably are expecting to spend your life with, you're probably expecting till death do us part. And unfortunately, that's when they parted. And this person's expecting you to just move on. And I thought about my own experiences with my dad passing and my experiences with some of my friends who passed from high school. And, you know, a couple of them tragically, one of them froze to death, which is really, really sad. And a very big, no disrespect meant, kind of a cautionary drinking story, which led to his passing, which is really tragic. Another one who just had unexpected health problems, nothing he could have done to prevent it. As far as anyone knows, it just took his life. And I think about those people, you know, I think about my dad with cancer. I think about these friends I used to have who have passed. And these are still people that I think about. You know, my dad passed away probably about 2019. So it's been honestly almost 6 years at this point. It's been like 5.5 years. And I still think about it. You know, now do I break down crying every single day about it? No. And that's where I think people need to separate these ideas. You know, where if you still are, I think that's okay too. You know, for me, there's probably once a week where I cry and I think about, oh, I miss my dad, or I miss my last cat, Kitty. Or I'll think about, you know, that kid in high school, like if we had said something different to him, could his life have gone differently? Would he still be around? You know, if he had had different friends, or if people had spoken to him differently, or whatever, you know. And some of this is putting things on yourself too. Even with my dad, I think, should I have pushed my dad to take his health more seriously and check on these things? And one, you have to realize that people make their own decisions, right? And there are also the people who pass just unexpectedly, and there's nothing you can do, and nothing anyone can do. But two, that it's okay to think about these people. You know, no matter what you think with your beliefs, you might be the most staunch atheist of all time. You slam your fist down on the desk, you say, nope, there's no God, there's nothing, it's just earth, and then you head over to r/atheism to rip apart a religion. Or you might be like the most devout Christian or Buddhist or whatever of all time, and you hop on the message boards to talk to people about how important your religion is to you and how everyone who doesn't believe in it's stupid. You know what I mean? Like, you could be the most devout in any belief system that you have, or totally against it. And I still think death hits people. You know, death still hurts people. You might look at people and you might say, well, why does it hurt you? You know, like you look at an atheist and you say, well, it makes sense. Like, you believe you'll never see that person again. You look at a Christian and you say, well, that doesn't make any sense. You believe you'll see that person again. I think death is an equalizer. You know, it's a thing that, like, no matter what we do or don't believe in past our life here, no matter what we think about the future, death is an equalizer that, like, kind of brings everyone down to their knees in a way. It's humbling. It is something that is an experience we all share. Everybody has lost someone. Everybody will pass on, you know, or will die, whatever you want to say, at some point. It might be when you're 105 in a hospital bed, edging it in the middle of Ohio to a VR girl in chat. Who knows? You know, you might live a very long time. Or it might be in a tragic car accident in a week from now. You don't know. That's why life is so special and important, right? Like, we don't know how much time we have. But it's something that we all experience. And yet it's something that almost everybody is kind of pushed to get over, to move on from, to move past. Where I think this is good is the idea of continuing to live your life. You know, when you lose someone important to you, and when the world loses a good person, I've never, ever, I'm sure there's a narcissist out there who would want this, who would not be a good person, who passed, but I have never known any of the good people in my life who passed to be someone who would want you to shut down, who would want you to give up, who would want you to throw away your life, throw away the opportunities you have, and just kind of die while living. And that's where I think the idea of moving on is good, right? Not forgetting, not getting over it. You know, you could be 20 years down the line, you lost your kid, and it still makes you cry some nights. And I think that's okay. And that's where I think it's weird, this idea of like, aren't you ready to date again? Aren't you ready to move on? Aren't you past it? That to me is like, these are different things. You know, being able to still function and still live and to pick yourself up again and live a life, whether that is, you know, maybe it's a partner and you decide to have another one in the future. Maybe it's losing a baby and you decide to try for another in the future. Any of these things, that doesn't mean that you have to move on and replace the thing, right? Like you just replace the person or you replace the memory or you dig it out of your life and throw it out. It's like, well, that was one chapter down. Too bad you're dead. Moving on. And that's where I find this so callous, this idea of moving on, that it feels like people push. It genuinely does feel like people push this idea that if it's been more than a year or two since something bad has happened to somebody, they need to just be over it and okay. And some people will never be fully okay. That should be okay. But with caution to getting too far into details, because this is someone my wife knows, so I don't want to get too far into details on like who this is, because I would never want them to see this and be very distraught about it. My wife knows someone, though, who lost someone very important to them, and this person did just kind of shut down. You know, like everything in their life, they kind of let it go. And they are somebody who now, years on, doesn't have a job, doesn't have any income, doesn't have a way to support themselves, doesn't have any friends anymore because they chose to actively cut them out of their life, doesn't have connections with their family anymore, but they're still alive. And what's horrible about this is, in a lot of ways, it's like they're not alive. You know, it's like you're alive, you're like your heart's beating, right? But you're not living. You know, you've totally shut down and you've been unable to continue living while also honoring the memory of those people. And now people deal with things differently. You know, some people, I think they have such bad mental health stuff that it's like something like this happens and they genuinely need mental health help. And that's okay too. You know, I think that honestly, believe it or not, even if you're like, you feel like you're the most put together person of all time, you've never experienced anything, tragic, and you feel that you're totally fine. I think that if you got anyone with a therapist and you didn't make them pay for it or anything for a few sessions, they'd learn something about themselves, right? They learn something that happened that, you know, kind of affected them in some way just by talking things out. So I don't think seeking that help is bad in any way. I think anyone who feels, you know, that would be beneficial to them, whether they feel like I need it or it would just help me. I don't think it really matters which of those you feel. It's good to seek that help. But this idea that you're going to just be over it is not true. But there's also a world apart, right? From continuing to live your life, trying to positively build it up, trying to make more connections that don't replace people. You know, one comment I saw, well, let me just finish my thought first before I get too tangentially off it. There's a difference between that, right, and shutting down and not living your life. I remember one comment I saw, and I don't even think it was meant to be bad. I'm pretty sure it was someone who's like far more on the spectrum than I am, from talking to them later on. So they probably meant nothing by it. But I remember when I got Cosmo and Luna, you know, we got our cats a couple years ago. And it was shortly after Kitty passed away, and somebody asked if they were like, you know, if we got like replacements for our cat. And this kind of is where I've noticed that people have this idea too, where it's like, there are people who think that you have to move on and just drop everything. But there's also people who think that you should never positively continue to grow, right? That once a connection is gone, that if you want another connection, it's just you replacing. You know, if your husband dies and you want to get married again in the future, you're just replacing them. If your pet dies and you want another animal friend in the future, you're just replacing your pet. And I feel like these two are polar opposites. You know, these ideas of move on, get over it. It's been 6 months. You should be out there jumping in bed with other men now. Come on, what's your problem, lady? And, oh, you've had this spot in your life where someone used to be, that now you want to make another connection. That means that you're dishonoring them, that you're replacing them, that you're doing something wrong by them. And I feel like both of these are unhealthy. You know, I just, What is the actual answer to it? I guess that's probably going to be different for everybody. But I feel like both of these things are things that people will regret. You know, when people move on from things too quickly, you can even see it with breakups. I mean, it doesn't even have to be a passing. You even see it with a breakup. When someone moves on too quickly, you remember how it's called like a rebound? Well, the reason it's called that is because this person is trying to bury their feelings a lot of times in something new. They're trying to move past something artificially quick, like too quickly for their mind and emotions to process, so they want to quickly get away from that feeling. But that's not really any more healthy than the person who had a bad breakup and 2 years later they're crying themselves to sleep every night. Both of those people are going to be experiencing negative outcomes from the way that they are processing this grief. Because human beings need some sort of moderation. We need the ability to process, feel, and continue to feel, you know, even years later, and also still exist. Yeah, I mentioned my dad a lot on this channel, but something I noticed from my dad, one of my biggest memories of him, was one time when he was 70, I believe, 71. And he had been diagnosed with cancer. And he was crying one day. And I asked him why, which is probably a stupid thing to ask, but, you know, like, I didn't know how to deal with any of this either. And he said it was because he missed his mom. It wasn't even about, like, this. You know, I think that just this diagnosis has made him think of death. The same way that my aunt passing made me think of my dad's death, right? And it was something that really struck me because this was a man whose mother had passed away 25 years before then. And he was crying because he missed his mom. And I think, to me, there was also a man who was willing to live a life after his mom died. You know, he was willing to continue to work, have a family, live a life, be a positive presence, help others. My dad was the kind of guy who, you know, when someone was down on their luck, he'd offer them a place to stay. When someone needed money, even if we weren't doing that well, he would try and scrape something together to help them. You know, that was the kind of man he was. He wasn't the kind of man who quit his job, locked himself in his room, and shut the lights off and existed, like, without living. He also wasn't someone who terminated his existence. And he also wasn't someone who 5 minutes after his mom passed away was like, all right, I'm over it. Who cares? He was someone who could still feel that years later. And I think that that's something that a lot of people are missing, where they feel guilty for feeling that later. They feel like they get this time limit, and as soon as that's up, they're just self-victimizing. Especially in a generation of online self-victimizing, self-diagnosing, all this stuff. They feel like, well, what I'm feeling must be that. I'm just feeling sorry for myself. There is a very big divide between just feeling sorry for yourself and shutting down and continuing to feel just because it's been more than a year or two. And I don't know if anyone needs to hear that. I don't know if anyone even watched the video to this point. I don't even know if YouTube showed this video to anybody. But it's something that mattered to me to kind of get off my chest because I wanted to talk it out loud. I didn't even write anything down for this, just to kind of process it myself, because it's something that I was noticing in people and feeling that I thought, this is important to me. Maybe one person needs to hear it. Hey, maybe that person was just me. Reasoning it out loud and hearing myself has made me feel a little better about myself. But you can let me know what you think in the comments down below. I don't do videos like this all the time, but I do have a playlist of what I call real talks, which is just supposed to be talks between me and whoever watches this channel. If you are interested in this kind of thing, that's where I have a lot of stuff like that. I also do talk about stuff like this over on our Let's Play channel, Degenerate Plays. We kind of switch back and forth. Some, you know, we handle that like a podcast. Some videos are like more comedic, some are more serious. We bounce, you know, around between topics, my friends and I. But I hope you know that, you know, you're not a freak for like feeling stuff. That's normal. And I think it's very, very sad that people have made others feel that way. So I hope you have a good day. And as always, everyone, stay shui.